From being arrested at 17 for computer hacking with a Commodore 64 and a Baud modem back in 1995 to offensive cyber operations at the NSA and now teaching hardware hacking and embedded exploitation for a living, that's not the journey of someone from a movie. That's actually the journey of Terry Dunlap, our guest on this special episode of the IoT Show. So we always talk about security being paramount to IoT success. What does that really mean? What are the threats? What are the risks? And how does a hacker attack on an IoT system look like? Terry not only will explain, but will also demo a man-in-the-middle attack on an IoT device. Hi everyone, this is the IoT Show. I'm Olivier, your host. Today we are going to do some hacking of IoT infrastructure. And for that we have Terry. Terry, how are you, my man?
I'm doing pretty good, man. How you been, Oliver?
I'm good. I'm fantastic. Where are you calling from?
I'm actually calling from Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C.
Is it cold now?
It was this morning. It was like 27 degrees Fahrenheit, but it's supposed to start working its way up to the 50s and 60s, so
Yeah,
not too
I
bad.
was, I was in Boston, like more north, but not too far. And recently, and it was freaking cold. I can do that.
You're not a cold weather person, I take it.
Well, on one hand, I can add layers, and that's okay. When it's too hot, you cannot remove that
Exactly.
many layers. But
Right.
anyways, digressing here. Terry, what are you doing these days in life? What is your job and what is your expertise?
Okay. Let me start backwards and bring you up to speed of where I started and where I got to where I am today. In some of this stuff, we can do a different show later on. Arrested at 17 for computer hacking with a Commodore 64 and a 300 baud modem back in 1985. Got in some trouble, spent some time in juvenile detention. That did not stop me, though, many, many years later from getting a job doing offensive cyber operations at the U.S. National Security Agency. That was in about 2002, just after the terrorist attacks in New York City. So they were on a hiring spree and they were looking for hackers, and spent about 5 years there supporting military missions being forward deployed. And they would have specific embedded devices that targets were using that they needed exploits written for. So that was my job, and my team's job was to help these special forces units identify these embedded devices and help them find vulnerabilities that could be weaponized to help track and locate these guys once they got in country. After spending about 5 years at the NSA, I left and started a government contracting company called Tactical Network Solutions. And what I had discovered during my time in the US government was that intelligence agencies do not like to share capabilities. So I saw an opportunity where my team and I could develop hacking capabilities one time and sell it to multiple agencies and militaries and friendly foreign governments around the world. So that's what we did. We did that in 2007. And our specialty was embedded devices, now commonly known as IoT. So IoT devices, firmware in specifically, we would actually download massive quantities of publicly available firmware from manufacturers like Linksys, Netgear, anybody that had public firmware, we would download it and we would look for vulnerabilities. Now, anybody who's done any reverse engineering with firmware understands that this is a laborious process. Our guy, Craig Hefner, at the time, was the author and is the author of Binwalk. So anyone who's done reverse engineering and used Binwalk, that was our guy, Craig Hefner, who built that as part of this future to automate reverse engineering of firmware images. So we did that. We kind of perfected it. Some investors happened to hear about what we were doing. So we created a brand new company called Refirm Labs, which came out of our government contracting company. That company basically sold a SaaS platform where manufacturers, developers of IoT devices could put their firmware image into the platform and immediately get a readout of where low-hanging fruit resides, such as calls to stir copy or exec, anything that could possibly be low-hanging fruit that an attacker could leverage and possibly weaponize against the manufacturer. So it gave the development teams insight into where they could secure the firmware better before it went to production. Shortly after we launched that company in 2017, it was about a year or two later, Microsoft discovered us at the RSA Innovation Sandbox competition. And we started this on again, off again courtship with Microsoft and Refirm Labs, whether they wanted to be a customer, a partner, or whatever. In the end, in 2020 of May, they actually offered to acquire Refirm Labs. So Refirm Labs was acquired by Microsoft in 2020. I spent 2 years at Microsoft being a principal program manager, helping oversee the integration of our firmware platform into what is called Defender for IoT. And then after the 2 year period, I wanted to get back to more of the offensive side of cyber. So I started Gray Hat Academy.
Mhm.
And this is where we actually teach people how to hack IoT devices, particularly firmware, looking for vulnerabilities and how to weaponize those vulnerabilities. So it's kind of come full circle where I've, got in trouble, worked for the government, trained the government, built products for the government, went the commercial route, went the acquisition, worked in big corporate Microsoft, didn't really like it myself. And then here I am back again in the startup world with Gray Hat Academy, teaching people offensive skill sets
Yeah.
that is in short supply out there. So that's the whole story, and I'm sticking to it.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I like it. I like it. I think it definitely sets the stage for the conversation today. And you jump rapidly into some of the details of, the firmware aspects of IoT devices and so on. Before we jump into a demo of, what we're talking about here, and for people to realize the risks of exposing your IoT devices to threats by not securing them correctly, I want to have a couple of more questions for you,
Sure.
because so you mentioned firmware. You mentioned a couple of things there. There is interest in the industry. Microsoft acquired a company that was about securing IoT devices or helping securing IoT devices. So there's like reasons why. But from your expert perspective, we talk about securing IoT all the time. It's important. It's core to it, and like then we directly dive into the details. But rarely do we address this question of what are the main things at a very high level that make an IoT infrastructure potentially a target for hackers? Because hackers don't care about your thermostat in your home, or do
Exactly.
they? Right?
Exactly. No, 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 they don't. And that's a good point. And that's why we targeted these things back in the, early 2000s, is that nobody pays attention to them. You get an IoT device, you set it up at home, your thermostat. How often are you concerned about upgrading the firmware? I would hope that these, now they actually automate the firmware update process. But if you have older IoT devices, look at your wireless router, for example. If you went out and bought your wireless router, I bet it's a router that you physically have to go into the interface, check to see if there's a firmware update. If there is, you have to download it and then you have to apply it to your wireless router. I guarantee you more than maybe 80% of Americans who bought a Linksys, D-Link, Buffalo, TrendNet type router do not update their firmware if it's not done for them automatically by now. And that's the problem. Most people buy these things and never look at them again. And that's why they make great targets. You're right. We are not interested as offensive operators or nation state actors in attacking your thermostat. But what it is an entry point for us to get into your network and then move laterally across to what we really want. So these are very easy devices to exploit, to manipulate, and basically allow us a back door into your network. And you're right. We're not interested in the device per se. We're interested in it because it allows us to get in easily and then spread throughout the network from there.
Okay, entry point. And then we hear all these stories out there of like this aquarium tank that has been attacked and in a casino somewhere, and
Yes.
then gave access to the enterprise, the casino business network, and anything can happen. So you're doing a lot of Linux these days. So Gray Hat Academy has like
Mhm.
courses that are about mostly how to secure, how to how to hack Linux, right? And so that means how to secure it, because we're talking about offensive.
Right.
It's like the red team, blue team is, you need to know how how hackers are proceeding or accessing these devices to really secure them. And so you're doing a lot of Linux. When we talk about IoT, there's a big portion that is about, and you mentioned firmwares, right? About real-time OSs and so on. But what is why do we want to focus on Linux per se, right today, and when it comes to IoT security? Is there a particular reason you want to focus and teach people on Linux security first?
Yeah, most of the IoT devices that when we had refirm labs, and this was our job, was to look at massive quantities of firmware images. The vast majority were Linux based firmware images. Now, there are arguments to be made that maybe some of the more complex devices, for example, SCADA systems or industrial control systems, or maybe systems that guide missiles and aircraft, those are more real-time operating systems, completely different skill set for those, but also great entry points into a network. But the vast majority of IoT devices, even consumer devices that are out on the network, or I should say out in the marketplace right now, are Linux based. And if you have a fundamental understanding of Linux and how to attack these Linux based systems, we think that is where most of the education needs to be at this point. We are slowly shifting towards real-time operating systems. For example, one of our classes is exploiting real-time operating systems, but it focuses on a very specific architecture, which is MIPS, and I don't want to go down that road right now. But to answer your question, why are we focusing on Linux? It's the vast majority of the market. Why do ransomware attackers target Windows primarily? It has the largest market share.
Yep.
So you go where the share is, and right now IoT devices, particularly consumer devices, are primarily Linux based at this point in time.
Yeah, that makes sense. And as a matter of fact, when I think IoT, I think IoT infrastructure with several devices that very often end up being connected to the internet through a some form of gateway. You were mentioning Wi-Fi routers, right? When you have a home
Yeah.
automation system in your place, you have the sensors, it might be Zigbee, whatever, they're running on this like RTOS and sometimes directly on the silicon. They are connected through that gateway. The attack point very often is that gateway, and we'll see that
Yeah.
soon enough in the demo. And actually, I think it's a good segue to jump into some practical discussion around how one would be going about attacking a Linux-based IoT device out there, right?
Yeah. Okay, so before I start here, I want to kind of give you a lay of the land and kind of give you the 30,000 foot view of how I've mocked this up. Now, I tried to keep this as realistic as possible. I know some of the stuff is still kind of contrived, but I think it drives home the point of what could be done in a more sophisticated, even nation state fashion. So, what we have here, we have our corporate gateway, which resides in New York City. And our IoT device, which is on the corporate network, is behind the corporate gateway, and it does not have a public IP address. So it has, if it wants to get out, it needs to go out through the corporate gateway. Now, this IoT device is sending some sensor data, very simple temperature, humidity type data, and it's going all the way across the internet to this server over here, which happens to be in San Francisco. Now, in order to get to the server, we have to go through, the internet and some routers. And this happens to be a router that's in London. I know it's kind of weird. It's going from New York to London back to San Francisco. But anyway, bear with me here. So the router one of the routers that's going through before it gets to the server is in London. And unfortunately, this router happens to be compromised. Okay, so an attacker has already compromised this router and is looking to see what kind of traffic is on there. Now, our attacker actually is in Toronto. And anytime this attacker comes online, there is a script he placed on this particular router that looks for him to come online. And if he does appear with a public IP address, then all traffic that goes out of this router now gets redirected through the attacker, out of the attacker, and then to wherever else it needs to go. So right now, as it stands, we have the IoT device talking to the server. Everything's normal. As soon as the attacker comes online, things start to change. And just to kind of make sure that we see this, I'm using DigitalOcean. I'm not an affiliate or anything like that. I just kind of like it because they're easy to use. So I set up all my devices here. So we try and mimic the real world as much as possible. And as you can see here, the IoT device is in the data center 3 in New York City. Our gateway is also in the same data center. The router that is compromised sits in the London data center, the server, San Francisco data center, and again, our attacker in Toronto. Okay, so our attacker is offline right now, as you can see here. So let me go ahead and pull up each of the different windows here. Whoops. Now, each window, this guy here, you can see he's the gateway. I'm already logged into him. I'm SSH'd into all these guys, just so you understand what we're dealing with here. Here's the server. Here's the compromised router. And then when our attacker fires up, I'll go ahead and SSH into him and then show you how he performs his man-in-the-middle attack. So in order for me to get the IoT device to start talking, I need to actually log into the IoT device, which is on the private network behind the gateway.
And here the fact that you have to log in there through SSH is not a good security practice, right? You would not do that. It's just for the demo purposes. But at the end of the day, if you are doing your job correctly, the device should never be accessible using SSH.
Correct. That's absolutely correct. So over here on the server, I'm going to go ahead and fire up my listener. So now my server's running. My server here in San Francisco is waiting for the IoT device to send it its sensor data. So I'm going to go ahead and start the IoT device. Okay, so we can see here that the data was sent and successfully received, and we see that it populated here with a temperature of 25.6 and humidity of 60. And it will do this every few seconds. Okay, so it's actually going through the router down here. Now, our attacker was on the pwned router days ago, and when he left, he started this script, I'm calling it Tunnel, that basically looks for him to come online. And once this thing starts up, we should start to see that it's actually doing some pings to see if he's actually on the network. And right now, it's just reading back to us that the machine is not reachable. Now,
Terry, it's a very common practice, this notion of a Trojan horse or a script that has been started. No one really noticed it. Here we're talking about a gateway, a server, but it could be running in an enterprise, virtual machine that someday was not locked down properly and someone got a password from, there's many ways, but at the end of the day, it ends up being someone got access and now put that little script that is doing its little work. No one notices it. It doesn't burn processing power or whatnot, right?
No, not at all. So I'm going to come over here to my attacker. I'm going to turn him on. And what I want you to do is pay attention to the pwned router down here, because once he's actually up and accessible, we should see this message change to that he is reachable instead of is not reachable. So remember, our attacker here is in Toronto, so we'll bring him on board here, get him fired up.
And once again, back to this notion of how this Trojan horse ended up on that server, the importance of not clicking on these freaking phishing emails is even more important, right? Because you can think that, hey, this random, bank or Viagra ad or whatnot has nothing to do with my job, and I happen to be an IT pro. But at the end of the day, I might be a target because I advertise on LinkedIn that I work for this company as that type of role. And so attackers now will submerge me with things that look totally random, but are not that random, correct?
Yeah. Exactly. Don't get me started about people clicking links in emails, because two things in this world, in my mind, would eliminate a lot of cyber attacks. If people stop clicking on links in emails, and if people started writing more secure code. But that's a story for a topic for another day.
There's hope, like from the generation's perspective. My kids are teenagers. They don't even read their emails. So that's fine.
Yeah, we're probably a safer world because of that. So as you can see here, the attacker has now come online, and the script has noticed that he is reachable. So it now created a tunnel. So this is nothing's happening with the traffic right now, other than if we go back here, all traffic is being routed through him right now. And as
Mhm.
you can tell, there was no interruption in the messages or the data going back and forth. So let me actually log in now to the attacker's machine.
Yeah, so we're still totally unseen here.
Yes.
Just watching.
Make sure I'm on the right machine. Okay. So now that I'm on the machine, I am the attacker here, and I'm going to go ahead and start a intercept session here. So what I want you to pay attention to is up here at the server. We might miss a packet or two as he's setting up the tunnels to do what he needs to do, but it still would not be enough to raise suspicion or cause an alarm or anything like that.
Mhm.
So pay attention here to the temperature data, because this temperature data is about to change once he starts his attack.
So basically, what it's doing is it's going to transform the data that the backend server receives, and basically decide what information the server sees from the
Yeah.
device, which is
So
not the
there we
real
go.
information.
We
Yeah.
just we missed one packet, but
Mhm.
the device said we'll retry. And now if you notice, we have now intercepted the packet. It even says that it's coming from the original IP address, and we have now changed the data. If I Control C, stop here, we'll tear down this and stop intercepting the data and forwarding it, and then we should see it go back to 25.6. There you go. And it didn't even notice that we changed the routing parameters or tore down the tunnel. I
Yeah.
mean, this
Okay.
looks very simple. It was very complex to set up, but this is the problem
Yeah.
with IoT devices. This is not rocket science, okay? In all transparency, I had this idea to do this demo as a post for LinkedIn to kind of demonstrate the problems with IoT security. And I used Chat GPT to say, hey, this is what I'm trying to do. What do you think I should, how should I set this up? What should I implement? And basically, it built this all for me. I mean, there were some problems you had to go through because it didn't do it, give you code exactly the way it should work. But by and large, with this, my prior knowledge and a little Chat GPT session, I was able to pull this off. And then, I mean, this is what I think is the problem with IoT devices
Um,
today.
Here we're talking about a temperature information, right? So from a thermostat, not a big deal. You don't see
Right.
the right temperature, something is wrong, just whoa. But you can think about like the extreme, which is might be a nuclear plant and that is remotely monitored, and then you have information that is not showing any alerts, but there is an actual alert, and you don't
Yeah.
see it. It doesn't
Yeah.
trigger the alarms that it should be triggering, and now you're in big trouble. And this is an extreme, right? But so tell me, Terry, I see the entire thing, man in the middle attack. We alter the information that is received on the other side. What did it take? Like, what are the main steps? So we talked about the phishing email, grab someone's credentials, being able to access that gateway through these credentials that were stolen. So that little script down there, what are the things that were necessary to implement that, and what are the practices that could have prevented that at a high level? Maybe
Yeah.
the two, three main things.
Olivier, it's very simple. I mean, this is transmitting data in the clear. Okay. Had any of this used, you know, SSH, or not SSH, but TLS,
Hmm.
or any type of web-based transport security mechanism, VPN, tunneling, any of that type of stuff would have been better than how most of these IoT devices operate, and that is sending data in the clear.
Yep.
And what we've noticed in the past, which is unfortunate, is a lot of the IoT devices that are currently on the market today, when we actually analyze the types of security certificates that are embedded within these devices, um, it's not very strong security, meaning like the key length probably could be stronger, could be longer to make it more secure. And some of the certificates aren't generated to last very long, like maybe just a few years. So
Mm.
imagine if you rely on, let's make it real, a consumer device that, I don't know, maybe it is your thermostat and you like to, notice it when you're on vacation and manipulate it on your phone. If those security certificates expire and there's no way to get new certificates on that device, I mean, the reason you bought it was to be able to control it from your phone. That won't
Mhm.
happen anymore.
Yep.
And so I think again, this is just my opinion, but I think in order to get around that and having to deal with issuing new certificates or even just one certificate that lasts for, 20 years or something, I think manufacturers just want to keep it as cheap and as simple as possible and choose the less secure route. And let's not secure anything. Let's just send it out. It's your
Yep.
temperature data. Who cares?
Yeah, yeah. No, I hear you. And then so bad practice based on reducing costs, because TLS, like implementing a secure connectivity, has a cost. You have to have some encryption mechanism happening, so it's compute. You have to have like keys and other certs in a safe storage from the bomb perspective on this hardware. That has a cost. And so yeah, it's some people are telling me, hey, it's about the risk, Olivier. It's about the risk, right? So should I invest more and there's higher risk, or less risk when I invest more, but if I cut the cost, what is the risk I can afford? But in general, you're just describing some common practices that are easy to implement, right? Like
Yeah,
TLS.
it's not rocket science and it's
Yeah,
not expensive.
it exactly. It doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be expensive. You mentioned also, updating things on the device, like pushing updates, something that
Yeah.
is very much at the core of when we're thinking about greenfield scenarios for IoT. But brownfield is a bit harder.
Mhm.
Greenfield, everyone is like, yeah, OTA is over the year update is core. Like this is something that is no longer a aftermath discussion. It's like we have to have it at the beginning of the project. How do you how do you suggest people look at brownfield? Like these devices that have been deployed 20 years ago are still out there, cannot be updated because they were
Right.
not designed for that.
Yep.
Are there recommendations for them to make sure that they're connecting to the cloud is secure?
Well, I mean, the recommendation that I would have is the recommendation I think we've all heard over the years, if not decades, and that's defense in depth. You're just going to have to layer as many defenses around this as possible because I mean that's your that's your chewy center right there. You want it hard and crunchy on the outside as much as it can be. So I think the best, and I don't have specific product suggestions since defense was never really my game to begin with. It's always been offensive. But yeah, I mean layered defenses of existing products that are out there because yeah, I mean you can't update these things, you can't take them offline, they're too
Yep.
critical. So defense in depth is probably your best option, and I'm sure there are defense experts, cyber defense experts out there more skilled and knowledgeable than I am to talk about how to defend these things.
Yeah. Well, we can count on you to keep on attacking to make sure. Well, not that you're actually attacking real systems, but educating people on how it's done so that they defend themselves better. I think
Right.
it's a good way of doing. I like that a lot.
And look, like I said, stop clicking on links in emails.
Mhm.
Okay. And like you said, the newer generation, maybe they don't check emails and click links as often. So that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And then the second thing is just implement secure coding. I mean, it's unbelievable how sloppy some of this code is that we find in IoT devices.
Mhm.
It- even if the devices were implementing any of the security suggestions that I had listed, if there's an open port that's not being used for any reason, and there happens to be a service listening on that port that is vulnerable, and that's another way into the device. And usually those services are just loaded with sloppy code.
Yeah.
And if people just understood secure coding practices, knowing that there are alternative functions to some of the common ones, the one I mentioned was stir copy, how they could use stern copy with an N in it, it's a little more secure. It's not 100%, but it's not going to lead to, say, some type of buffer overflow or something that somebody could easily take advantage of
Yeah.
who's
Yeah.
skilled in that particular art.
Yeah. And that's an interesting topic that we could spend hours on that, but that you're mentioning. So secure coding is very much supported by the frameworks or the middlewares you're going to use. And because embedded development is very lean, the objective is to optimize and minimize the code. So you basically have people developing in C++ very much directly to the APIs of the OS versus going through a layer that would be a middleware that has some level of security that prevents buffer overrun and this kind of things that modern developers don't even realize exist. I
Right.
mean, like
Yeah.
if you are out of school today and you're just coding with higher level, languages and middlewares and frameworks, you don't realize that there's something called buffer overrun that, if you're attacking at lower levels and not using the right APIs, you are at risk of writing or writing code in places that someone else can read. And that's where trouble happens, or killing the OS by invading the memory spaces because there's no limit to the function you're using. But anyways, it's interesting that maybe another thing that's going to help is the arrival of higher level coding tools, frameworks, middlewares onto these IoT devices to to prevent developers from messing up, because now you're going to have a secure layer that they will code against versus using the unsecure bits that are available in that OS, right?
Yeah, no, you're 100% right, and that would make my job and my team's job a little harder if people actually started coding more securely. So it might put us out of a job.
You're good. You're good. There's still going to be, entry points, and humans will still click on that link, and
Yeah,
passwordless way of doing things, two-factor authentication, things like that will help, but there will always be attackers that will come in because there is a value in attacking, right? There is interest, whether it's a state, whether it's like, an individual, whether it's a company with, not good intentions. There are reasons why they do that. And as long as there are reasons, they'll find ways.
yeah,
So,
yeah, exactly, exactly right.
okay. So, Terry, where can people go learn how to hack Linux in order to better protect their IoT devices?
They can go to grayhatacademy.com. Gray hat spelled with Gray.
Okay.
We got courses there, both online and live in-person classes, and we have a free shell coding class there too. So if you're pretty sophisticated and you want to learn how to write your own shell code, there's a free video lesson up there by one of our guest instructors to show you how to write some shell code for your next
Awesome.
exploit.
Awesome. I'm signed up, so I need to go through the course because I'm interested. I want to know how to hack my neighbors. And awesome, Terry. Thanks a lot for your time today, everyone. Thanks for tuning in, and see you soon.
Olivier, it's been a pleasure.